There are a lot of people this weekend like me who won't celebrate with their dad, but your heart will be filled with warm memories of your father. My dad went to heaven, as I like to say. I never say I lost my dad, because you'll never lose your dad. If you had your dad, you'll never lose him. He went to heaven when I was 32. My dad was 59 and far too young to go to heaven, far too young to leave me. He left this earth only 55 days after his bride, after my mom passed away. So it was a rather traumatic time. And I remember being called by my father, who walked into the hospital with stage 4 cancer. And he called me up, and they were doing a biopsy. And I said, I couldn't understand him because he was all sedated. And his best friend, John, got on the phone and said, John, are you telling me my dad has stage 4 cancer? He said, yes. I said, I'll be right there. So I flew to Staten Island, and I spent probably 2 weeks with my dad, for the most part, other family members, but really just me and my dad. And my dad and I had a great relationship. We had very different, if you've heard me talk about my dad, the former New York City police officer, we had different political opinions, and which made it interesting. You know?
And he knew this about you, right?
Oh, yeah. He heard me.
So you didn't try to hide it?
No, he heard me on the radio.
Right.
He was my biggest fan. He'd listen to every show, and he'd say, how can you believe that? But he loved me, and he called me sport, and he loved me, and he was just so proud. My dad was very proud of any accomplishments that I ever made. And boy, was I proud of the accomplishments that he made. So many that I won't even talk about on the air here. But there was a moment toward the end there in the hospital, because he was passing, that he became very sick. And he got very sick, and I went to the nurse's station. He was vomiting and getting very ill. I went to the nurse's station, and all I remember saying, Jennifer, was I said to the nurse, I said, please give my father morphine or something strong, because he's lived such an honorable life that what he doesn't deserve at this point is to be in any pain. He doesn't deserve that. So if you can please make that happen, I would appreciate it. And she said, certainly. And the morphine kicked in pretty quickly. And as the morphine was kicking in, I was holding my dad's hand, and his eyes got heavy. And I didn't know we were going back to politics under the morphine.
But he did.
But he did. And his eyes got kind of heavy, and he turned to me and he said, Brian, my son, you called me, my son. He said, tell me something. I said, Dad, anything. I said, I'll tell you anything. And ask me anything. Because we knew this was
coming close.
We were saying goodbye.
Yeah.
And I said, ask me anything. He said, how is it? And he's struggling for the words because the morphine is having an impact. How is it that a guy like you gets hooked up with a guy like him?
Uh-oh.
I didn't understand the question. So I asked him to repeat it. I said, I'm sorry, Dad. How does a guy like you, Brian, get hooked up with a guy like him? I thought he meant my on-air radio partner at the time. I said, do you mean Tim Conway Jr.? He said, no, I love Tim. I said, who are you talking about? How does a guy like me get hooked up with a guy like him? Like who? And he said, the former president. I said, Bill Clinton?
Yeah.
He said, yeah.
We all want better for you, Brian.
How does a guy like you, my son, get hooked up with a guy like him?
So funny.
I took my father's hand. I said, Dad, I'm not hooked up with him. And I said, but he is a character, huh? And my dad said, oh, boy, is he ever. And then the doctor came to me and said, look, this is an emergency situation. We're taking your dad downstairs, and we're going to perform a procedure. And the doctor said to me, and of course I cried when he said, after this procedure, your dad may not awaken from this procedure. We have to take him right now. So like a scene from a movie, I'm walking next to my father on the gurney, and we're walking very quickly. And I'm holding his hand. And I said, I'm going to be with you, Dad. I'm going to be with you, Dad. I'm coming with you. They're going now. They're going to help you out downstairs, and they're going to do the very best they can for you. My father was anything. Stupid was not one of them. And the elevator doors open. And I had stopped calling my father Daddy at about 5 years old, because boys don't call their father Daddy. Men, teenagers don't call their father Daddy. They call them Dad.
Sure.
Because I felt like Daddy was a term that babies use. The elevator door opens, And there's my father on the gurney. I have his hand. And I said, Dad, I want you to know that when you wake up from this procedure, whether you know it or not, I'm going to be right there and I'm going to be holding your hand. Mm-hmm. And he said, thank you, Brian. And he said, you know, I love you. And without thinking, at 32, I said, and I love you, Daddy. So I play this song this morning for all who are remembering their father this Father's Day. It's by Rick Springfield. It's a short song, and it's called My Father's Chair.